Juneteenth was celebrated on the 19th of June. That was recently, according to when you're looking at this. And it was seen celebrated, well, to some extent across the entire African diaspora as freedom and emancipation to some extent. Now, some may be wondering, isn't there already another Emancipation Day? And yes, there is, but this is another one, and that's kind of what we're going to get into with this video. With the celebration of Juneteenth, you see some interesting diaspora wars popping up all around the place. Well, according to where you're at, if you're on Twitter, you might see some of that. If you're not, you might be wondering what on earth I'm talking about in the first place. So we'll get into a brief history of it all. So Juneteenth is a celebration of freedom from slavery. Now, it isn't the same as the Emancipation Day that we would celebrate in Trinidad and Tobago and some other Caribbean islands and different places around the world, because many of those places we celebrate Emancipation Day based on when the British stopped slavery. However, Juneteenth is an American specific holiday, and that's why it gets into some bacchanal too. It is some American specific history. The Americans fought a civil war to stop slavery because they were not under the control of the British anymore. The northern states, they were okay with this no slavery business. A lot of the southern states were not, and they fought a whole war to stop it basically. Several 100,000 lives, I believe, were lost basically to stop the practice of slavery in their country. So that's good on them, I guess. Now, here's the bad part with it. Although slavery, I believe, was stopped in the United States on the 1st of January 1863, I believe. 2 years later, in 1865, there were still some people, some slaves, who were still being held as slaves. Well, people being held as slaves. Because this wasn't the same world we lived in now. To get things done, you kind of had to go do it yourself, or get your military or someone representing you to go do it yourself. And the United States is quite a large land mass. And the northern states with the control up north there, they were saying, okay, the slaves are now free, we won the war, yes, grand. But down on the southernmost end of the United States in Texas, some of those people were not being treated with the freedom that they had already won. So on June the 19th, or on the 19th of June in 1865, I believe, a general reached down to Texas and passed some law or proclamation down there, finally freeing the last set of slaves inside of the United States. Now, the truth is, this still even wasn't the last bit. And to explain the real complexity of the history of slavery, that's something I always like to point out. The history of slavery, the history of humanity on a whole, is actually very complex. If you're trying to deal with this on a humanist kind of level and find who was right, who was wrong, who's the better, who's the worst, it's a difficult thing to do. Wait. Hit that like button. Yeah, oh, right, yeah, please. Thanks. And if you're not subscribed, now might be a good time to do so. The red button with the subscribe written in it, yes, you hit that. Good. You hit the like button already? All right. Now back to the video. The final slaves are in the United States, I believe, were released from natives. Some Choctaw people, I believe, were the final ones who held slaves in the United States, and that was still sometime after June the 19th. But officially, June the 19th was that final proclamation made. So there was celebration on that day. June the 19th as that last bit of freedom. Now, if you're looking in the United States at this from their perspective, if you're looking for one day to celebrate the emancipation of slavery, then you could celebrate that kind of with the Civil War. When the Civil War was won, to some extent, that was the purpose of it. You could celebrate it to some extent like that. Especially if you're someone who is more of a nationalist and patriot to the United States, you would see it as, yes, we fought this war. This is when we celebrate the freedom of slavery and the fact that we united this country once again, and okay. But in 2021, President Joe Biden made June the 19th an official federal holiday to commemorate that action. Now, some people see this as being more of a political move than an actual thing to help black people or Africans or freed slaves, because they saw it as more of a move to push along the lines of BLM, which was kind of in the height Black Lives Matter and the struggles of black people still and systemic racism, and it was more along that line. So there's some political lining going along with this whole Juneteenth business, and okay, we know there are some arguments there. However, many in Black America are very happy for this celebration. Yes, we've got nowadays, this is a good thing. We've got nowadays to celebrate. And now, since last year, there was some celebration seen across the wider diaspora. You were seeing some people, some Black Caribbean people, some African people who immigrated to the United States. They were celebrating along with them. And then you started recognizing, wait, there's a little difference going on here. You started seeing some names popping up more and more. For some people who would have been in the know, some of these names would have been familiar, or the concepts would have been familiar, but you saw some of this popping up more with the Juneteenth, as you saw ADOS, and then another group, FBA, and they were speaking about themselves as being separate from the general black or African group. They aren't the same as everyone. This Juneteenth business is more specifically for us in this ADOS FBA group. And I can understand their point. You see, the ADOS refers to the American descendants of slavery. And what they are speaking about is that there should be some distinction, there is some distinction between those Americans present right now, black Americans, who would have been direct descendants from slavery on the American mainland, and then Caribbean people who would have been descendants probably of slaves, very likely, but in the Caribbean. And then especially even some difference between people who would be descendants of Africans who may have never been enslaved, at least not in the European context, and they would not have that shared history. So they're trying to point out that there's some difference in the shared history there. And there would be some extra friction because in this, there's also a call for reparations. There's a call for repairing the damage that was done before. And those who descended from slaves in America are thinking, well, we have a direct request to the United States to request our reparations. There, I believe I've heard some in the ADOS community say something like $20 trillion is the number they're looking at, which is okay. You ask for what you like, but you could understand then why there would be some friction there. They're asking for that, and they're saying there's a specific limit as to who this money would go to. They're asking for a cash payment, yes, cash money, dollars, and it should go to direct descendants of slaves who can trace their ancestors back to the American homeland. And there's also a little shade difference on that because there are several organizations involved. The ADOS are there, but then there's another organization, the FBA. They refer to themselves as the Foundational Black Americans, and I believe I believe between those two there's some friction because there are some accusations that those running the ADOS groups are similar to the BLM group, and those in the FBA groups are the real authentic ones. They refer to themselves as the Foundational Black Americans because the suggestion there is that they are the ones who helped build this America, this United States. So if they were there, they were the ones that the United States were built upon. They argued the United States as it currently is was built upon slavery. So anything the United States has, they owe to them. Now, I may beg to differ, and if you look at the actual economics, the United States got a boost in their industry and in their efficiency from moving away from slavery, because slavery has been proven time and time again to actually not be that efficient. So it may have started in the muck and mire that is slavery, but to say it was built on slavery, as in the abundance that it has, is necessarily directly attributable to slavery. To that, I'm not sure that is a claim that could be verifiably made, but I understand it nonetheless, and I understand why they can say that. So I've been reading, and I saw someone making the more direct claim where the United States, I believe, promised the 40 acres and a mule or something like that as the payment for those who were freed from slavery, and they never gave them it. So there's actually something there maybe they can make a legal claim for. And they're saying now, if you try to tag in everyone who came along all along the way, it would kind of water down the claim. I could understand that. And then the addition onto that is that when these diaspora wars break out during other times, these Caribbean people show themselves to not necessarily be one and the same. And when I say these Caribbean people, I'm aware that I am a Caribbean folk too. But we're more specifically talking about Caribbean people in the United States. And for example, one of the prime examples would have been something we spoke about on this channel just last year with Mr. Michael B. Jordan and his Juve rum that got him into quite a bit of a storm in a teacup in the Caribbean among some people in the Caribbean diaspora who said that he was stealing aspects of Caribbean culture, because many people in the Caribbean diaspora who understand Caribbean culture understand that there are unique aspects of Caribbean culture that do not belong to other people. And I could understand if that argument is made from the Caribbean side that there are unique aspects of the Caribbean culture that can be seen as being stolen by people who may be Black American, then you could understand. I think you should be able to understand why some people who may see themselves as Black American, foundational Black Americans, may see it as it being possible for people in the Caribbean to steal aspects of their culture. And it cannot be that we are all Black people and all one and the same in certain areas, but then when it comes to certain aspects of the Caribbean culture, and you see people with their little Caribbean flags in their profile, that you treat that as exclusive, because then are we not all Black people? And also with that argument is the further argument too that there are cultural differences between the groups, and those cultural differences have differences in behaviors. So you could look, for example, in the United States, and there are earning differences between Black people who immigrate from the Caribbean, Black people who immigrate from Africa, and Native American Black people. There are earning differences. Caribbean and African immigrants tend to earn more than native local Black people in the United States. There may be very likely cultural reasons for that, but then there are accusations that come from the local Black community in the United States that there seems often to be inferior treatment coming from some of those other immigrants when treating with them. And then there are cultural differences, there are tribal wars, tribal scruples coming from Africa, cultural differences coming from the Caribbean that are not necessarily the same in the United States. For example, in the Caribbean, we have a distinction more specifically between Black, Indian, and when the two are mixed, you call that Dougala, at least here in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, in the United States, that's the same as Black for the most part. You look in the United States and they have a vice president who is Black. Ostensibly, she's announced as Black. She's announced as the first Black vice president. But then, to the Caribbean, she is Douglas, she is mixed. And then in the earlies, she herself would have referred to herself as Indian, because in the Caribbean, if you're a Douglas, it's not seen as you're one side, you're thrown to the African side. No, you're both Indian and African. That's understood. There's a cultural mix there. And many of the Native American Blacks look and see like there seems to be some kind of agenda there, and I could understand from their side. When I look at some of these things, I myself find myself smirking and wondering, okay, something really does seem to be a little fishy going on there. When you look at many of the times the Blacks that are put into forward positions, they seem to very often be Blacks that aren't native to the United States. Mr. Barack Obama, he is only half Black, and is it half or a quarter? And the half or quarter that is Black is African immigrant, not from the United States. He is the first Black American president, and he's not foundational Black American. The first Black female vice president, she is half Indian and half Black, and the half that is Black is Jamaican, Caribbean immigrant. So she is only half black also, and the half that is black is not foundational black American. They boasted recently about a black press secretary that is now the first LGBTQIA2 plus black press secretary, and she's a Haitian immigrant also. And you could understand, I could understand if you are making that distinction between lineage and you're saying, okay, that there's some cultural commonness among this group, this ADOS, FBA, however you want to call them. This group, there is some cultural commonality. There are cultural commonalities among the Caribbean black people or among African black people. Okay. Then is there some specifically bad treatment against this group? And they are the native group? You could really ask that question. But to me, when you look at this and you look at when you get into the specifics and you go, if you want to see some of the highlights of this, go on Twitter and you would see it. Because you would see there is some bacchanal between the Pan-Africanists, those who have that green, red, black flag. And you'd see, I believe over the Juneteenth weekend, there was some conflict because some people were saying that the flag they were using to celebrate Juneteenth was the Pan-Africanist flag, while some people believe that the flag that should have represented it should have been the American flag, because Juneteenth is an American holiday. It's not about the Pan-Africans, about every African in the diaspora. No, and in fact, some of those in that diaspora may have had ideologies that were against what freed the slaves during Juneteenth. And shouldn't it be that the cultural group and the representatives and representations of this cultural group be the thing that represents what this culture achieved? And as I said, you could go on Twitter if you have that interest in seeing that. And to me, what it also points to is tribalism. It points to tribalism, and it gives us an understanding that really and truly, when it comes down to it, the race and the hair and the skin color is not actually what matters. It's not actually what matters, because we could always find some other way to divide ourselves. The division itself has always been the intent. Tribal division always finds a way somehow, and that has always been the intent. So sometimes when you get yourself lost in the skin color, or lost in the race, and lost in the white supremacy or some other supremacy, you could miss the fact that it's a human tendency, and this tendency is inside of you too. It's not something specific to some other group. It's not something unique to some other group. You have that same tendency in you, and very often we see that if we find ourselves in positions of ascendancy or power, we lean in that very same direction too. All right, that's all I have for now. So tell me what you think. Tell me what you think about this whole discrepancy between the ADOS groups, the FBA groups, and the wider Pan-African groups. Do you think it's a sensible thing? Do you think there should be a distinction, that it shouldn't all be just all black people, that all black people aren't the same? What's the purpose of having distinctive groups, of labeling people into distinctive groups? I'd suppose some kind of identification purpose. So by calling someone black, what can you assume about them? If I say someone is black, what can you assume about them? If I say someone is ADOS, what can you assume about them? If I say someone is FBA, what can you assume about them? Are these distinguishing factors, these labels, more practical in terms of identifying groups, or are they only better in terms of dividing people further? Should we be looking for less division? Forget about ADOS or FBA or Caribbean. Even forget about black. On a whole, we are one human race, and don't even bother to have distinguishing methods, which I think is a good idea. Sounds like a good idea, but wouldn't actually work in practicality. So tell me what you think. Drop a comment, hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed. You can hit the notification bell. Also, that helps so you know whenever any new video drops, and I will see you later.